The sky had that kind of glow you only get on a clear Saturday evening in spring. Just enough sun to make the windows of the Grand Astoria Hotel gleam like polished silver. I remember checking my reflection in the car window before I stepped out. My tie was straight, the navy suit pressed sharp at the seams, shoes buffed to a quiet shine. In my inside jacket pocket, tucked into a velvet case, was the Rourke family watch, brushed steel, gold-rimmed face, Roman numerals. It had belonged to my grandfather. He passed it to my father, who passed it to me. And today, I was going to pass it to Brielle, my daughter, my heartbeat, my purpose. I approached the reception gate with steady steps, rehearsing how I might hand it to her. A piece of our story, I would say, or maybe just for your next chapter. I wasn't sure. It had taken me days to decide to bring it. I wanted the moment to be right, special, undeniable. I imagined her smile when she'd see it. A young usher in a black vest and earpiece stood at the guest list table. He looked maybe 22, a little too eager. He asked for my name, and I offered it without hesitation. Malcolm Rourke. He glanced at his tablet, fingers scrolling through a digital list with that bored efficiency that made me suddenly aware of the weight of the moment. Then he frowned, tapped something again, and looked up with that polite panic of someone about to deliver bad news. "I'm sorry, sir, your name isn't on here." I smiled lightly, assuming it was a typo. "It should be. Malcolm Rourke, father of the bride." He looked again. "There's a Mrs. Charisse Rourke, and a +1 listed, but no Malcolm Rourke. Are you sure you are SVP'd?" I chuckled, trying to play it cool, though the air suddenly felt tighter in my chest. "I paid for the event. Trust me, I RSVP'd." And that's when I heard the click of her heels. Pearls swinging gently at her collarbone, a white satin shawl over her shoulders like she'd walked straight out of a lifestyle magazine. "Charisse. My wife, for now." She sauntered up, eyes scanning me like I was something she forgot to throw out of the fridge. Her lipstick was red, but her smile was colder than anything the usher could have delivered. "Did you really think you were invited?" she said, tilting her head. "Strangers aren't allowed." I blinked, not because I didn't hear her, but because the words hit too fast, too loud in the quiet space between us. The usher shifted awkwardly, looking anywhere but at me. Charisse gave him a nod as if to say, "It's handled," and turned toward the grand ballroom, her train catching a breeze like it had its own ego. I didn't follow her. I didn't move. "Excuse me, sir," the usher said, voice tight with apology. "I'm going to have to ask you to step aside." I stepped back slowly. Not away from the hotel, but away from the version of myself that thought I still belonged. I glanced at the watch in my hand. The velvet case looked smaller now, like a mistake I wasn't supposed to carry here. From inside, I could hear the soft strings of the quartet tuning up. Laughter. Champagne glasses clinking. My daughter was in there. The little girl who once wore my socks as gloves and called me Papa through her missing front teeth. The same girl who I'd taught to ride a bike and picked up from every sleepover. The one who asked me to braid her hair in middle school when her mother was too busy to bother. I had raised Brielle like she was blood. Better than blood. I was there for every milestone. Paid for her braces, her ballet shoes, her college dorm furniture. I was the one who stayed up with her to help revise college essays, even when I had work the next morning. I was the one who held her when she sobbed after Anthony, her biological father, sent her a blank birthday card when she was 16. She tore it up and cried into my shirt. I remember telling her, "I'm not going anywhere." And I didn't. Until tonight. Because Charisse wasn't just being petty. This wasn't a moment of cruel flair. This had been planned. Orchestrated. She hadn't forgotten me from the guest list. She'd erased me from the story entirely. I looked back once, through the tall glass doors, where the crystal chandeliers flickered like fire trapped in ice. Somewhere in that ballroom, Brielle was being toasted and twirled. Somewhere in there, someone else was likely stepping into the space I'd held for 26 years. I put the watch back into my jacket pocket. Not because I wanted to keep it, but because it didn't belong to anyone who saw me as a stranger. A valet walked past, barely noticing me. I realized then that I had become invisible. Charisse didn't see me. Brielle, maybe she didn't either. I pulled out my phone, considered calling Brielle, just to hear her voice. Just to make sure she knew. But I stopped myself. If she wanted me there, really wanted me, she would have noticed my name was missing. I walked slowly back to my car. Not angry. Not broken. Something quieter than that. Something final. The engine hummed to life, but I didn't pull away right away. I sat there, letting the silence fill the cracks. I was no longer Malcolm Rourke, husband of Charisse, father of the bride. I was something else now, something between memory and myth. They had decided I didn't belong. So now, I would show them what it meant to truly disappear. I used to think that love was something you built like a house, foundation first, brick by brick, sealed with promises and painted with shared memories. For 26 years, Charisse and I lived in what I believed was a home. It had laughter in the walls, plans in the drawers, and dust in the corners from years of living like real people do. Messy, hopeful, flawed. But somewhere between the anniversaries and the late-night arguments, the paint cracked. And I didn't notice how far I'd faded into the background until the night she called me a stranger. Charisse hadn't always been cruel. There was a time she used to light up when I walked in the door. We met at a jazz bar on Clark Street, a smoky little place where the saxophone never stopped and the cocktails were always too strong. She was wearing a navy wrap dress, laughing with a friend, and I remember thinking I'd build something with her. She had this presence, sharp, elegant, untouchable. I didn't know then how prophetic that last word would become. When we married, Brielle was barely 3, a little bundle of curls and questions. Her father, Anthony, had disappeared like spilled wine, fast and staining. No explanation. No goodbye. Just gone. I never tried to take his place. I just showed up and kept showing up. I was the one who sang her to sleep, who taught her to tie her shoes, who stayed up all night helping her build that crooked science fair volcano in 5th grade. We carved pumpkins together, danced in the kitchen to old soul records. I sat through Frozen more times than I care to admit, just to hear her laugh. That was our rhythm, our quiet understanding. She called me Dad, without needing to be asked. I never needed more than that. People used to tell me how lucky I was that Charisse had let me into their lives. What they didn't understand was, I didn't ask to be let in. I built the damn staircase that led to the door. I showed up when Anthony didn't. I stayed when no one else did. I loved her daughter when it was inconvenient, when it was exhausting, when it was hard. And somehow, somewhere, that became invisible. It wasn't always this way. Even 5 years ago, we still felt like a family. Brielle used to text me random pictures of things that reminded her of our inside jokes. She used to call me for advice. Dad, should I take the internship or finish the semester? Or Dad, what's a good wine to bring to dinner with Marcus's folks? And Marcus, he was a good man. Still is, far as I know. He always shook my hand with both of his. Always addressed me with respect. I thought he saw me. I thought they all did. But Charisse, she changed. I don't know when it started exactly. Maybe it was when Brielle got into college, and Charisse felt like she had to retake control. Maybe it was resentment. I earned more than she did. I handled the bills, paid off the house, built the retirement. I never held that over her head, but maybe she held it over mine in secret. Or maybe it was Anthony. He reappeared briefly when Brielle was 20, some half-hearted birthday card, and a promise to reconnect. I remember finding the envelope in the trash. She'd thrown it away without reading it. Or so she claimed. But after that, something changed. Charisse started saying things like, "You know she's not yours, right?" Not in anger. In passing. Like a joke with a knife in it. I'd shrug it off, not because it didn't hurt, but because if I reacted, it would be real. And I wasn't ready for it to be real. So I buried it. Then came the rewrite. Suddenly, in family gatherings, Charisse would tell stories where I was absent, where Anthony's name slipped in as if he had been there for the first recital, the first broken heart. I sat at those tables listening to history get edited in real time. And Brielle, she didn't correct her. That was the part that gnawed at me the most. Maybe she didn't notice. Or maybe silence was easier. I told myself they were just words. I told myself love was proven in action. But love without recognition, that's how you become a ghost. When Brielle started planning the wedding, I was all in. I offered to cover the expenses, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. A gesture of love. I met with the florist, toured the venues, even coordinated the caterer. Charisse didn't object, not directly. She just began having side conversations. Things I wasn't looped into. Meetings I heard about after the fact. The invitations went out, and when I asked to see them, she waved a hand and said, "They're handled." And then, that night at the Grand Astoria happened. I keep replaying that moment in my head. Her words, the way her lips curled around stranger, like it had been rehearsed. Like she had saved it for just that moment, the final blow. It didn't matter that I paid for the venue, that I bought Brielle her first car, that I stayed up all night by her bedside during her high school flu. It didn't matter that I was the one she cried to when she didn't get into Columbia. All of it vanished in the span of seconds. I drove home after leaving the hotel, my hands steady on the wheel, but my mind fracturing. I passed landmarks we used to share. Our favorite coffee spot, the park where Brielle learned to skate, the bookstore where Charisse and I used to browse poetry we never bought. They all felt like museum exhibits now. Frozen, observed, untouchable. That night, I stood in the kitchen, tie undone, sleeves rolled up. I poured a drink and stared at the empty chair where I used to read the paper, the hallway where Brielle used to come running for hugs. I was still standing in the home I paid for, but it no longer felt like mine. It was just walls now. A place where my memory had been evicted. That was the moment I knew. I wasn't part of their future anymore. And maybe I hadn't been for a while. 2 nights before the wedding, I stood in the kitchen chopping onions for a stir-fry no one asked for, trying to ignore the silence that had bloomed in the house like mold. I'd made enough for 3, me, Charisse, and Brielle. But only one plate got touched. Charisse was in the guest room with the door closed, and Brielle was, well, somewhere. She hadn't responded to my texts in 3 days. The last message I sent was simple, looking forward to rehearsal dinner. Let me know what time to be there. Scene. No reply. I stared at the phone on the counter, hoping it would buzz. It didn't. The next morning, I was brushing my teeth when Charisse appeared in the mirror behind me, adjusting her earrings like I wasn't even there. Her voice was soft but pointed, like a scalpel in a velvet pouch. You don't need to come to the rehearsal dinner. I paused mid-brush. What? It's just for the girls, she said, like that explained anything. And her real family. My hand slowed. I rinsed my mouth. I thought the rehearsal was for the whole wedding party. She smirked and patted her hair. Well, you know how traditions evolve. I laughed. A short, surprised bark of sound that escaped without permission. Real family. I said. Are you serious right now? She didn't answer. She just walked out, heels clicking on the tile, her perfume hanging in the air like the last word in an argument I hadn't signed up for. That phrase echoed louder than her footsteps. Real family. Like I was some placeholder who'd overstayed his welcome. A background extra in a life I helped script. I tried not to let it land. I told myself she was stressed, that this wedding had taken a toll on everyone. But I wasn't blind. I saw the signs. I just kept hoping Brielle wouldn't go along with it. But hope can be dangerous when it turns to denial. That evening, I sat on the porch with a beer in one hand and the wedding itinerary in the other. I'd printed it out weeks ago, color-coded, every detail mapped out like a campaign. That was how I operated. I was always the planner, the organizer, the man people counted on to keep things running. I flipped through it again, trying to make sense of the new rules being written around me. My phone finally buzzed. It was Brielle. We'll catch up at the wedding, Dad. That was it. No, sorry, no explanation. Just those 9 words. And that word, Dad, hit like a wave and a dagger all at once. I sat there staring at the screen long after it went dark. I wanted to believe that word still meant something, that she meant it. But the more I played it over in my head, the more it felt like a formality, a convenience, a bookmark in a story she was already rewriting. I could feel it happening, page by page. I thought about the night Marcus proposed to her. She'd called me first. Me. Not Charisse. Not her best friend. Me. I remember her voice vibrating through the phone, giddy and bright. Dad. He did it. On the Ferris wheel like I said I always wanted. I teared up. Not because I was losing her, but because she still saw me. Because she'd let me in. We talked for an hour that night. She even joked about how Marcus was too nervous to ask my permission first. He'll make it up to you, I promise, she'd said. And he had tried, in his own way. Marcus was polite. Maybe too polite. The kind of man who sends handwritten thank you cards, but never quite meets your eyes when things get heavy. He always thanked me for the help, the funding, the support. But his family? His parents had never warmed up to me. They were old school, high society types who threw garden parties and wore judgment like cologne. Every interaction with them felt like a job interview I didn't get. At the engagement dinner, Marcus's mother had leaned over to Charisse and said, I'm so glad Brielle will have her father walk her down the aisle. It's symbolic, you know. Charisse didn't correct her. I swallowed it like I swallowed so many things that night. Still, I smiled. I made the toast. I footed the bill. Because I believed that love wasn't about being thanked. It was about showing up. And God knows I showed up. Even when the room was cold. even when I could feel my name slowly disappearing from the story like the fading ink on a forgotten receipt. 2 nights before the wedding, I found myself rereading old texts from Brielle. Ones that said, "Thank you for everything." Ones that had hearts and exclamation marks. There was one from her first year of college. "I miss your pancakes. Love you, Dad." I kept that one. Still do. That night, instead of the rehearsal dinner, I went to the lake. The one where I used to take her fishing when she was little. She never cared about the fish. She liked the way the water sounded. She used to throw breadcrumbs at ducks and ask why they never got full. I sat on that same bench, alone, as the sun sank behind the hills, and I wondered how we got here. How a man could give everything: time, money, affection, years, and still end up uninvited to a moment he helped create. I didn't cry. I don't do that easily. But I felt something hollow carve itself into my chest. A quiet kind of grief. The kind that doesn't announce itself with sobs, but settles in your bones and changes the way you carry yourself. When I got home, Charisse was already in bed. Her phone was lit up with group texts and notifications. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her scroll, laughing at something someone had sent. Not once did she look up. I wanted to ask her why. I wanted to ask when I stopped being part of her definition of family. But I knew she wouldn't answer. Not with anything real. So I turned, walked down the hallway to my office, and closed the door. And for the first time in years, I locked it. The envelope sat on the kitchen counter, a soft ivory square that practically glowed under the morning light. I remember the way it caught my eye while I poured coffee, angled slightly, just enough to show the gold embossing on the corner. Grand Astoria Hotel, Wedding Division. I reached for it, expecting to see my name. A part of me even smiled, thinking, finally. The official invite. The confirmation I'd been waiting for. I slid a finger under the flap, careful not to tear it. I was someone who still believed in keeping things neat, especially things meant to be sacred. But when I pulled the invitation out, my smile didn't even get a chance to fall. It collapsed instantly. Mrs. Charisse Rourke and guest. No Mr. No Malcolm. No father of the bride. Just my wife, if that's even what she still was, and a generic +1. A placeholder. Like whoever she brought mattered more than I did. I stared at it for a long time, blinking once, twice, then again, trying to find logic in it. Maybe it was an oversight. A formatting error. One of those mistakes that happens when you let a vendor handle things on autopilot. But even as I told myself that, I knew better. The handwriting on the outer envelope was familiar. Charisse's elegant loops. She had addressed them all herself. I turned the envelope over in my hands, then looked at the stack of others in the corner. Charisse had left them on the credenza by the door days ago. She said they were going out with the mail. I didn't pay attention then. I do now. Because now I remember who got them. Her cousin Trina. Our neighbor, hell, even Wendy from her yoga class. Each one addressed fully, Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so. Full names. Full respect. I opened the drawer next to the fridge and pulled out the list I'd helped draft, the guest spreadsheet we'd worked on together over wine one night 6 months ago. My name was on it then. I typed it in myself. I scanned the column again. There was Charisse Rourke. Next to her, guest. The field where my name used to be had been cleared. It wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. I sat at the table with the invitation in front of me like it might eventually blink back an explanation. The coffee cooled beside me, untouched. I thought about walking into the bedroom, confronting her. But what would I say that hadn't already been ignored? What answer could she possibly offer that wouldn't insult us both? Instead, I pulled out the velvet box with the wristwatch again. Opened it. Closed it. Ran a thumb over the gold-trimmed face. It wasn't just a watch, it was history. My father wore it to my high school graduation. My grandfather wore it at his retirement party. It was passed down, not bought. Given, not earned. I'd kept it waiting for a moment that mattered, and this was supposed. Instead, I pulled out the velvet box with the wristwatch again. Opened it. Closed it. Ran a thumb over the gold-trimmed face. It wasn't just a watch, it was history. My father wore it to my high school graduation. My grandfather wore it at his retirement party. It was passed down, not bought. Given, not earned. I'd kept it waiting for a moment that mattered, and this was supposed to be it. Brielle's wedding. The day I'd pass on more than a trinket. The day I'd remind her of where she came from. But it was clear now. I wasn't part of where she was going. I could still hear her voice in my memory from a year ago. You're going to walk me down the aisle, right, Dad? She had said it while stirring sugar into her coffee, casual like she was asking if I could pick up dry cleaning. but that moment meant everything to me. I nodded, unable to speak around the emotion crawling up my throat. Now I wondered if she even remembered saying it. Later that afternoon, Charisse breezed through the house like nothing had shifted. She wore a coral dress that brushed her knees and sandals that clacked lightly on the hardwood. She hummed a tune as she moved from room to room, tossing keys, checking lipstick, answering texts. I stayed seated, holding the envelope like it was a wound. "You addressed this wrong," I said. She paused near the door, tilting her head. "What?" "The wedding invitation. It says Charisse Rourke guest." She smiled a little too quickly. "You live here. Why do you need an invitation? Everyone else got one. With their name. Even Wendy." Charisse shrugged, grabbed her purse, and slung it over her shoulder. "It's not a big deal, Malcolm." "It is to me," I said, voice lower now. She looked at me then, really looked. Her expression shifted slightly. Not guilt. Not even defensiveness. Just that smooth, practiced calm she wore when she was done caring. "Don't make this about you," she said, soft and clipped. "It's Brielle's day." I watched her leave, the door clicking shut behind her like punctuation. That was when I realized I wasn't supposed to be part of this chapter. I was being written out, and the ink had already dried. I walked into the study and opened the cabinet where we kept old photos. There was one in particular I searched for, Brielle at 10 years old, sitting on my shoulders at the state fair. Her face painted like a butterfly, my hand holding onto her legs to steady her. We were both laughing. Real, wide, unguarded joy. I kept that photo framed on my desk for years. But when I reached the shelf, it wasn't there. I searched the next one, then the bookshelf, then the end table by the couch. Gone. Other photos remained, Charisse with her college friends, Brielle at a piano recital with her mother, but I had disappeared from the frames, like someone had gone through and erased me by hand. I sat back on the couch and let that sink in. You think the worst thing someone can do is leave you, but that's not true. The worst thing is being surrounded by people who keep you around physically, out of convenience or inertia, but quietly erase you from everything that matters. That's a deeper kind of loneliness, a more humiliating betrayal. I folded the invitation carefully and placed it back in the envelope. Then I slid it into the drawer where I kept my spare house keys and checkbook. Not because I planned to keep it forever, but because I wanted to remember the exact moment when everything became undeniable. They weren't just leaving me out of the rehearsal. They weren't just forgetting a name on a piece of paper. They were rewriting the story, and I was no longer in it. When I told Miles what happened, he nearly knocked his coffee over. We were at our usual spot, a small corner cafe near his office, the kind of place where the mugs are mismatched and the regulars talk like family. I hadn't planned to tell him. Honestly, I hadn't planned to tell anyone. But the words slipped out like a confession, low and almost ashamed. They didn't let me in. Miles. I wasn't on the guest list. He stared at me across the table, brow furrowed like he hadn't heard right. "What the hell do you mean you weren't on the guest list? You paid for the wedding." "I know. You paid for the venue, the flowers, the catering, hell, even the damn string quartet." "I know." He leaned forward, his voice rising. "Malcolm, what in God's name are you doing sitting here like this? You should have raised hell." I looked down into my coffee, watching the steam swirl like smoke from a slow-burning fire. "That's not the point." He scoffed, sat back in his chair, crossed his arms. "Then what is the point? That they humiliated you? That your wife stood there and basically called you a stranger while wearing the pearls you bought her?" I didn't answer right away. There was too much noise in my head to hear myself think, let alone respond. But eventually, I found the only truth that mattered to me. The point is, they didn't see me. And I'm done trying to force anyone to. Miles fell quiet then, his jaw clenching as he processed that. He shook his head, muttering something I didn't catch, then finally said, "You're a better man than me." I would have flipped the whole damn table. I gave him a sad smile. "Maybe. Or maybe you just haven't been worn down yet." The truth was, I didn't walk away from that gate because I was weak or stunned. I walked away because I was done. There's a difference. Weakness would have meant staying there, begging to be let in, pleading my case like a man on trial for loving too hard. But I wasn't on trial. I was already sentenced, already erased. So I chose dignity. That night, I went home and packed a bag. Not a dramatic exit, no suitcases hurled down the stairs, no shouting, no slamming doors. Just one leather duffel, the same one I'd used on our honeymoon in Maui. I filled it with essentials, a couple of shirts, some clean slacks, my sketchbook, the watch. I took my passport. Not because I had anywhere to go yet, but because I liked the idea of options. of motion, of maybe, finally, living for myself. Charisse wasn't home. She was probably still at the Grand Astoria, soaking in the glow of the pre-wedding dinner. I imagined her laughing, charming Marcus's parents, placing herself in every spotlight like she always did. I used to love that about her, how she could walk into a room and own it without trying. But over the years, that light stopped shining on me. It started burning me instead. Before I zipped the bag shut, I took one last walk through the house. Not because I was feeling sentimental, but because I needed to let go cleanly. I paused at Brielle's old bedroom, the one we'd painted lavender when she turned 12 because she insisted purple helped her think. Her trophies still lined the shelf above her desk: gymnastics, debate team, spelling bee. Most of them I'd been there to see her win. She used to beam at me from the stage like I was the reason she stood there. But that was a long time ago. Now I wasn't even allowed inside the building. I moved to the hallway, my fingers brushing the framed photo of our family trip to Charleston. Brielle had just finished high school. We took that trip instead of throwing her a big party because she said she wanted memories, not noise. I remembered holding her hand as we walked along the harbor, the way she leaned her head on my shoulder when she got tired. That moment used to mean something. Now it felt like someone else's story. When I reached the front door, I placed the house key on the table in the entryway. Not because I was done for good, though part of me suspected I might be, but because I didn't want to carry around keys to a place that no longer felt like home. A stranger doesn't need keys. A stranger knocks and waits to be let in. But I wasn't knocking anymore. I got in my car and drove. No destination, just miles and streetlights. The city stretched out in all directions, indifferent to the ache in my chest. Eventually, I pulled into a small roadside motel, the kind with flickering signs and carpet that smelled like old cigarettes. It wasn't much, but it was quiet. And that night, quiet felt like luxury. I sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out the envelope I'd prepared weeks earlier. The one labeled Charisse, in case you crossed the line. It was meant to be symbolic more than anything. A safety net. A warning she'd never have to read, if she hadn't, in fact, crossed the line. Inside it was a single sheet of paper. No threats. No venom. Just a simple letter. You've made your choice. Now I'll make mine. I loved you. I loved her. But I won't live uninvited in a life I helped build. I placed the envelope in the motel safe along with a flash drive containing all my legal documentation, things I hoped I wouldn't need. Bank account changes. Trust modifications. Transactional time bombs waiting for one final trigger. People think silence is surrender. But sometimes, silence is a scalpel. Sometimes, the most powerful sound in a room is the one that never has to be spoken. Miles texted me again the next morning. Just a single line. Still think it's not about the money? And I responded, it was never about the money. But they'll feel it anyway. 3 weeks before the wedding, something in me began to shift. It wasn't a lightning strike. It wasn't dramatic. It was quieter than that. A nudge in the ribs. A twitch in the gut. A subtle but unshakable whisper, don't trust this. I had seen the signs, my name disappearing from things, Charisse's dismissive glances, Brielle's sudden distance. And so I did what any man who's been made to feel like a guest in his own family does when the ground starts to tremble beneath his feet. I planned for the quake. It started with the credit cards. Most of the wedding expenses were charged to a platinum card in my name. I had taken care of the venue deposit, the catering, the prepaid honeymoon package in Tuscany, the floral design consultation, because that's what a father does, right? At least, that's what I thought back when I believed I was still the father. Back when Brielle still called me to ask what shade of gold looked best on table linens. One afternoon, I sat at my desk, the sun pouring through the blinds in quiet bands of light, and I began to make the calls. Not to cancel, no, that would have been too obvious. Too easy to undo. I spoke with the venue manager first. A polished man named Jerome who had once praised me for my attention to detail. I told him I wanted to update the payment parameters. Place a hold on final charges. Not a cancellation. Just a delay. Standard accounting review, I said. Jerome didn't ask questions. People rarely do when you speak calmly and wear a suit even on your day off. Next was the caterer. Then the honeymoon suite, an ocean view villa with a private infinity pool just outside Florence. The reservation was still intact, but I placed a conditional clause through my concierge service. Final approval required from me 72 hours before check-in. If not confirmed, the booking would release. Silent. Painless. No fireworks. Just gone. Then I called my lawyer. William Ansley. Old friend. Older eyes. We'd gone to college together, and he'd watched my life unfold in quiet pieces over the decades. He didn't ask how things were. He just listened. That's what made him dangerous. He never needed backstory to see the truth. I want to revisit the trust, I said. For Brielle? He asked. Yes. You're finally going through with the estrangement clause? I hesitated, then answered. I want it in writing. Active, not theoretical. We'll let out a sigh, not judgmental, just tired. Malcolm, once you cross this line, I'm already on the other side of it. He didn't argue. We adjusted the clause. Originally, it had been buried in the fine print, a failsafe built during a particularly rough patch with Charisse when I was trying to protect Brielle's financial future no matter what happened between us. The clause was simple. If Brielle ever formally severed ties with me, whether through legal affidavit or demonstrable rejection, then the disbursement schedule would freeze indefinitely. She wouldn't lose everything. I wasn't cruel. But the full release of her trust, the second tier meant for investment capital or the eventual down payment on a home, would lock itself like a sealed vault. And now it was active, not out of malice, out of clarity. They thought I wasn't paying attention, that I'd keep signing checks just to feel needed. They forgot I was a builder by trade and temperament. And every builder knows when the structure is compromised, you don't wait for collapse. You fortify. You salvage what matters. The next day, I visited the bank. Quietly. No appointment. I sat with a private banking manager, a sharp-eyed woman named Serena who remembered my name before I gave it. We reviewed the auto debits and wedding withdrawals. The bills Charisse had pushed through. One for a luxury shuttle bus. Another for embossed napkins with custom monograms. A third for a harpist who was being flown in from Napa. All on the card. All under my name. I made Serena switch the alerts. From Charisse's email to mine. From her number to my backup line. I didn't tell Charisse. I didn't need to. Let the show go on. Let the preparations continue. Because the stage, the lights, the music, it was all built on scaffolding I could pull away with a tap. And I had set the timer. A quiet string of automated triggers. Adjusted through the online dashboard, hidden behind a secondary layer of passcodes. Nothing malicious. Just enough to make them look up. Just enough to show them what happened when the man they thought was a doormat decided to take the floorboards with him. I wasn't doing this to get revenge. I was doing it because they already told me who I was to them. Optional. If you make a man feel like a stranger in his own legacy, don't be surprised when he starts closing doors you never thought he had keys to. I thought about the watch again, the one meant for Brielle. I hadn't touched it in days. It sat in the drawer now, still nestled in its box. Untouched. Unclaimed. I had intended to give it to her after the ceremony, when everyone else was sipping champagne and dancing beneath chandeliers. I'd imagined slipping it into her palm and whispering, "This has waited 3 generations to belong to you." But how do you pass down legacy to someone who no longer sees you as part of their bloodline? One night, I caught myself standing in front of the mirror with the watch in hand. I stared at my reflection, really stared, and I didn't see a man who was broken. I saw a man who had finally stopped making excuses for people who wouldn't make space for him. I slid the watch back into the drawer, not because I didn't love her, but because love doesn't mean handing over everything when they've decided you mean nothing. Let them have their wedding. Let them drink the wine and post their pictures and pretend I was never meant to be there. They had their plans, but now so did I. I don't know what made me check the time. Maybe it was instinct, or maybe it was that low thrum in my chest, the kind you feel when something you built begins to tremble. It was 3:47 p.m., exactly 12 minutes after the ceremony was supposed to start. I imagined the ballroom, the flower arrangements, the quartet stationed under the crystal chandelier. I imagined Marcus standing at the altar with his hands clasped in front of him, nervous and proud, and Charisse somewhere near the front row, basking in attention like sunlight. I wasn't there, not because I didn't want to be, but because they decided I shouldn't be. And so I stayed away. But I didn't disappear. I had spent the morning walking along the waterfront near my new apartment, drinking coffee out of a paper cup and watching sailboats drift across the lake like they knew where they were going. By noon, I was back at my desk with my laptop open, watching the sequence unfold exactly as I had programmed it. Not dramatic, not destructive, just corrective. At 2:58 p.m., the catering company sent its first alert. Full payment was required before service could begin. The transaction on file, my card, had been paused. At 3:02, the luxury transport service flagged a delay. Their invoice remained unpaid. Charisse, by then likely in her seat at the ceremony, wouldn't have noticed the dominoes falling. Not yet. Not until the quartet, at 3:09, sent a brief, apologetic message to the event coordinator. Their final balance had not cleared. They would not play a single note until it did. That's the thing about control. People assume it's loud. But real control is quiet. It's in the details. It's in knowing which threads to pull and when. By 3:17, the venue's assistant manager, some poor guy named Brian, who had no idea what was coming, approached Charisse mid-aisle. I had called the venue the night before, confirming the cancellation clause. Without my code word, the remaining balance would not be processed. Jerome, the manager, had hesitated. "Mr. Rourke, are you sure?" he'd asked. "Completely," I'd replied. Now, Brian stood beside Charisse, whispering in her ear, his clipboard trembling slightly. I wasn't there to see it, but I could imagine it vividly. I played the scene over in my head a dozen times. The way her eyebrows would arch, the way her lips would press into that tight line that always came before she exploded. She'd glance toward the coordinator, then toward the quartet, now standing awkwardly in silence. The guests, dressed in their finest, would begin to murmur. And Brielle? I pictured her in the bridal suite, alone in front of the mirror, bouquet trembling in her hands. Her veil pinned perfectly, makeup flawless, ready to walk toward a man who loved her. But the music hadn't started. The hush hadn't come. Just confusion. Static. Delay. The ceremony stalled. I timed it down to the second. Not to ruin the wedding, never that. I didn't want to destroy her day. I just wanted to leave a fingerprint. A quiet reminder that I was not disposable. That you can't spend a lifetime erasing a man and expect him to keep funding the erasure. The phone on my desk buzzed once, twice. Unknown numbers. Then Charisse's name. Then again. I silenced it. Let it ring. It buzzed again, this time a voicemail. I didn't listen. Instead, I pulled open the drawer beside me and took out the old photo of Brielle and me from when she was 9. The one I'd given to Charisse in the envelope the night I walked away. I had made a copy, just for me. She was wearing her pink princess dress, missing a front tooth, arms wrapped around my neck like I was the only thing keeping her anchored to the world. In the photo, she looked like a girl who trusted me with everything. Maybe she had. Once. But trust, like glass, doesn't always break in a shatter. Sometimes it fractures, silently, until one day it just doesn't hold anything anymore. At 3:39, the honeymoon suite in Tuscany was officially released. The concierge sent a confirmation. Reservation canceled due to payment lapse. The bridal assistant, poor woman, would likely break the news sometime after the ceremony, if the ceremony even happened. No champagne toast. No suite with chilled strawberries and rose petals on the bed. Just a hollow echo of what had been planned, built on the assumption that I would always be there to fund their delusion. Back at the Grand Astoria, I imagined Marcus's parents exchanging terse whispers, checking their watches. His mother, no doubt, eyeing Charisse with barely concealed disapproval. This was because silence, when wielded right, is thunder. It wasn't until just after 4 p.m. that the final push came. I had timed it to a remote trigger, a text message sent from my backup line to an auto-processing server. The trust fund protocol activated. Not the full lock, just a notification sent to the account's manager and my lawyer. Conditions of estrangement detected. Freeze directive initiated. It was clinical, efficient, unmistakable. That was the part Charisse hadn't anticipated. She thought cutting me out socially wouldn't reach the financial systems. But I built this. Quietly. Years ago. I built safeguards. Not out of suspicion, but out of love. I wanted Brielle to be protected from the chaos that sometimes grows between adults. I never imagined I'd needed to protect myself. The silence in my apartment was so different from the noise I imagined erupting inside the Grand Astoria ballroom. It was clean, calm. I leaned back in my chair and let the sunlight fall across the hardwood floors. For the first time in months, my chest felt light. Somewhere in that chaos, Brielle would eventually ask the question no one wanted to answer. Where's Dad? Not Malcolm. Not Mr. Rourke. Dad. And maybe, just maybe, when the music didn't play, and the petals didn't fall and the suite in Tuscany dissolved into vapor, she'd remember who had always been there, and who had always chosen her. Not out of obligation. Not because it was easy, but because she was mine, even if no one wanted to admit it anymore. I didn't do this to hurt her. I did it to remind her. And for the first time since the envelope with no name, I felt whole. I don't think Charisse read the letter right away. Knowing her, she probably stuffed the envelope into her clutch while pretending not to be rattled, pasted on that brittle smile, and returned to her seat like nothing was cracking underneath her. But I had watched that smile too many years to know what it meant when it started to twitch. She always underestimated me because I never raised my voice. She thought calm meant weak. What she never understood was that silence has teeth. And I had finally bared mine. It was hours later when she must have opened it. Maybe in the car, maybe back home in the quiet, after the chaos had begun unraveling in full. The note wasn't long. I had written it by hand, slow and deliberate. On the back of that old photograph, the one of me and Brielle from her 9th birthday. We were dressed to the nines, playing pretend after a daddy-daughter ball at her elementary school. She wore a tiara. I wore a tux. She looked at me like I had strung the stars in the sky. That night, she fell asleep in the backseat with glitter in her hair and her hand still in mine. I stared at that photo for a long time before I turned it over and wrote 7 words in ink that would never smudge. If strangers aren't allowed, neither is support. I didn't write it out of anger. I wrote it out of truth. That was the price they set, the cost of cutting me out, of standing at the gates of my daughter's wedding and being told I didn't belong. Charisse had drawn that line with a smile on her face. Brielle, maybe unknowingly, had walked across it. The second sheet in the envelope was more formal. A printed copy of the active trust clause. Highlighted in yellow was the section outlining conditions of estrangement and the subsequent consequences. I left nothing ambiguous. The moment they decided I was not family, the trust would freeze. Not in retaliation. In reflection of what had already been made clear, I was no longer part of the foundation. That was the message I wanted her to read while the caterer packed up untouched hors d'oeuvres, while the string quartet loaded their cases in silence, while the venue manager fielded call after call trying to explain why the lights were still on but the magic had dimmed. Back in my apartment, I sat with my phone on the table, screen face down, buzzing every few minutes like a fly banging against a closed window. I didn't look at the messages. Not because I was being dramatic, but because I knew what they'd say. There'd be panic, accusations, maybe even guilt-dipped apologies. None of it mattered now. The moment to speak had passed. They'd held their tongues when it counted. I was just doing the same. My last act that evening was to shut it all off. I opened my banking app and revoked access to the joint accounts. I paused all auto-pay transactions associated with the wedding. I even closed the line I had once opened for Brielle's post-college expenses. An account I had funded monthly without her asking. A gentle safety net she never had to think about. That was gone now too. Not because I wanted her to suffer, but because I couldn't protect someone who saw my presence as optional and my absence as unremarkable. Then I turned off notifications entirely. My phone went still. There was a strange comfort in that silence. Not lonely. Not even empty. Just quiet in a way I hadn't known in years. It was the sound of freedom. Of finally choosing myself after decades of being everyone else's reliable background character. I lit a candle. Not for ambience or mood. Just because it smelled like cedarwood and made the room feel less like a new apartment and more like a home I'd chosen. I poured a glass of scotch, the good one I'd been saving for a celebration I thought I'd be part of. And I sat down at the kitchen table, breathing slowly, letting everything settle. Somewhere across the city, they were all talking. Piecing together what had gone wrong. Pointing fingers. I could see it play out like a stage drama. Charisse demanding answers. Brielle, confused, maybe heartbroken. Marcus's family stiff and furious, wondering what kind of chaos they'd married into. But it wasn't chaos. It was consequence. A few hours later, my phone rang again. This time, it didn't buzz. It rang. A real call. From Marcus. I stared at the name for a full minute before answering. Malcolm. His voice was cautious, tense. Not angry. Not yet. Yes. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. Why now? I didn't know, he said. I swear I didn't know. About the trust. About the catering. About any of it. I thought you were going to be there. I thought he stopped. You thought wrong, I said quietly. There was silence on his end. Then, slowly, Brielle didn't know either. I think she's starting to realize what Charisse did. I said nothing. He didn't ask me to explain. He didn't push for details. Maybe he knew better. Maybe he saw what Brielle hadn't yet, what it cost to cut a man out and expect him to keep building the house. She wants to talk to you, Marcus added. But she doesn't know how. I took a long breath. Tell her I'm listening. When she's ready. Thank you, he said, soft and grateful. I ended the call without saying goodbye. I wasn't being rude. I just didn't want to pretend we were something we weren't yet. I appreciated that he reached out, that he tried. But trying now wasn't the same as standing up when it mattered. Still, it was more than I expected. I placed the phone back down and looked around the room. The candle was still flickering. My scotch was half finished. The silence was still holding me like a warm coat I hadn't realized I'd needed. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like someone's afterthought. I felt like a man who had remembered his own worth. I moved out 2 days after the wedding. No drama. No ceremony. I didn't leave a note on the counter or pause for one last look at the life I used to have. I had already done my looking. At a wedding I wasn't allowed to attend. At a family that smiled wide without me. At a wife who called me a stranger and made sure I felt like one. I waited until late morning. Charisse had left early, probably to salvage the ashes of her grand event. I could picture her circling the venue with that fixed smile, trying to downplay the unraveling as unexpected hiccups. She would spin it. She always did. I took what was mine, just enough to fit in my SUV. A few suits. My favorite coffee mug, the one Brielle made in art class when she was 7, lopsided and glazed in uneven blue, with Dad carved into the side like it was a brand. A few framed photos she hadn't managed to erase yet. My books. My sketches. I left the rest behind. The furniture. The flatware. The curated life. She could keep it all. I didn't want any of it anymore. It was just the shell of something already hollowed out. The apartment I'd found wasn't large, but it was enough. 1 bedroom. Exposed brick. A view of the water if I stood on the tiny balcony and leaned just right. It was the first space I'd chosen entirely for myself in decades. No compromises. No neutral color schemes to make other people comfortable. I bought a small couch in deep navy, a writing desk in dark walnut, and a reading lamp with a pull chain that clicked with the softest, most satisfying sound. I unpacked slowly, deliberately. Not because I had nowhere else to be, but because each object I placed was a declaration. A memory I was keeping. A part of me I was reclaiming. For years, I'd lived in a house where I tiptoed through conversations, swallowed disappointment, and made myself smaller for the sake of peace. Here, I could breathe full. I reopened my old sketchbook on the first night, the one I hadn't touched since before Brielle's engagement. I didn't draw the wedding. I didn't draw the ballroom or the moment Charisse called me a stranger. I drew the lake. The curve of the shoreline. A father and daughter silhouetted by dusk, holding fishing rods. No faces. Just posture and closeness. I hadn't spoken to Brielle since the chaos. Marcus had called again, but I let it go to voicemail. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even waiting. I was just still. In stillness, I was learning, was its own kind of healing. In the mornings, I walked. I'd never noticed how good the world smelled at 7 a.m. Coffee, dew, early sun warming the sidewalks. I started greeting people I passed. An old man who walked his corgi in a bow tie. A barista named Lena who made a perfect cappuccino and called me sir, like I was royalty. I was invisible in the best way. No expectations. No edges to soften myself against. On Saturdays, I found a weekend sketch class in the basement of a community arts center. Mostly retirees and high school students looking to build their portfolios. I didn't talk much. I just drew. Pencil on paper. Line after line. A new kind of rhythm. One no one else could disturb. Miles visited once, bringing a bottle of scotch and a look of cautious respect. He walked through the apartment slowly, taking in the sparse furniture, the framed sketch on the wall. "You okay?" he asked. "Better," I said. He nodded, and that was enough. He stayed for an hour. We talked about old college stories, laughed about nothing important. It felt like being human again. Like shedding an old costume and rediscovering the weight of my own skin. I didn't stalk Brielle's social media. I didn't ask anyone how the honeymoon mess had resolved itself or if the photos came out well despite the missing quartet. If they posted pictures, I didn't see them. I had no interest in seeing smiles I wasn't part of. The silence from her end was long and consistent, and I didn't interrupt it. She had my number. She had my memory. The rest was up to her. One afternoon, I walked by the marina and saw a little girl teaching her father how to skip rocks. She kept getting frustrated when hers plopped instead of danced. "It's okay," the dad said, crouching beside her. "The ones that plop still matter." That stuck with me, because I had plopped. I'd fallen out of their narrative, a splash too loud, too inconvenient. But I still mattered. I knew that now. I wasn't waiting for their story to change. I was riding my own. The healing came in strange waves. Not dramatic, not cinematic. Just moments. Choosing my own groceries. Listening to jazz without anyone asking to change it. Drawing for hours and not being interrupted by a crisis that wasn't mine. I didn't have to fix anything anymore. I wasn't needed. But for the first time, that wasn't a wound, it was relief. I had given my best years to people who decided I was only worth what I could provide. And now, I was providing for myself. People say healing looks like forgiveness. But for me, it looked like stillness. Like the quiet snap of a pencil on paper. Like a key turning in a door that only I walked through. And in that space, alone but not lonely, I began to remember who I was before I started begging to be seen. I didn't expect to hear from Brielle again. Not really. Weeks had passed. Maybe a month. I stopped counting after the second Sunday came and went without a word. I didn't hate her. That would have been easier in some ways. Hate gives you a place to put the hurt. But what I felt was deeper. Emptier. It was like standing in a hallway full of closed doors and realizing none of them were going to open for you ever again. I told myself she had chosen her path, that maybe I was just a stepping stone she'd outgrown. Some days, I even managed to believe it. Then came the message. It was short. Simple. No apologies. No paragraphs. Just a question. Can we talk? I stared at it for almost 5 full minutes. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because the question itself took more courage than I expected from her. And maybe that meant something. Maybe it meant she had begun to see the wreckage in the corners of her new life. Maybe she finally noticed the chair I used to sit in, the voice that no longer picked up when she called, the silence where there used to be answers. I waited a full hour before I replied. Same cafe by the lake. Saturday, 10 a.m. I didn't ask if she'd be alone. I didn't ask what she wanted to talk about. I didn't promise I'd come with open arms. But I did agree to meet, because despite everything, she was still my daughter. Not by blood. Not even legally anymore, depending on which paper you looked at. But in the way that mattered most. I had raised her. I had loved her. And maybe, just maybe, she still carried a sliver of that love inside her too. Saturday morning came, crisp and wind-stirred. I got there 10 minutes early, because that's what you do when something matters. I wore a soft gray sweater under my coat, not the kind I used to wear to church or formal dinners, but the kind you wear when you want to feel like yourself. I ordered coffee and waited at a table near the window, the one with the best view of the water. I always sat there when she was little. We'd come after her swim lessons, her hair still damp, her cheeks pink from chlorine and laughter. She walked in at 10:04. Alone. No makeup. No dramatic coat. Her hair was tied back in a way that reminded me of the girl I used to pack lunches for. She spotted me quickly and approached without hesitation, though her shoulders were tight with nerves. I didn't stand. I just looked up and nodded once. Hi, Dad, she said quietly, slipping into the seat across from me. It was that word, Dad, that almost undid me. Because for all the pain, all the silence, all the choices that had hurt me more than she could know, that word still reached me. Still felt like something true. I wasn't sure you'd come, she added, eyes down. I wasn't sure you'd ask, I replied. We sat in that breath for a while, the kind that stretches because it's holding too much. Then she looked up, and I saw the tears already shining. She didn't wipe them away. Just let them fall. I didn't know what Mom was doing, she said. I knew something was off. But I didn't think, she stopped herself. I didn't think you wouldn't be there. You didn't notice I wasn't invited? I asked gently. Not an accusation. Just a truth that needed light. She shook her head. I thought the list was handled. I asked her if everything was set. She said it was. I nodded slowly. She said a lot of things. Brielle leaned forward, hands clasped tight. Dad, I should have checked. I should have, her voice cracked. I didn't realize how much she'd rewritten things. I thought, you were just being quiet. I was, I said, but not by choice. Her face crumpled. Why didn't you call me? Tell me what she was doing. I let out a long, low breath. Because by the time I realized how far it had gone, it wasn't about you not knowing. It was about you not seeing. She looked away then, toward the window. The wind was shaking the branches outside. I saw you at the edge of everything, and I didn't pull you back in, she whispered. No, I said. You didn't. We sat with that. Let it settle between us. No one tried to deny it. That's how I knew we had a chance, because this time, there were no lies to cushion the landing. Finally, she reached into her bag and pulled something out. A velvet box. She slid it across the table toward me. I stared at it for a second before opening it. The watch. My father's. My grandfather's. The one I'd meant to give her before it all fell apart. I found it in the drawer, she said. After the wedding. I knew what it was. I remembered the story. I remembered you telling me I'd get it when I started my own family. I didn't speak. I just looked at her. I'm sorry, Dad, she said, for not seeing you, for letting her make you invisible. I nodded slowly, then closed the box and pushed it gently back across the table. No, I said. That was never mine to keep. I brought it for you. I still want you to have it. Not because I forget what happened, but because I remember everything that came before. She bit her lip, tears slipping again, and this time she didn't even try to hide them. I don't know how to fix this, she whispered. You don't have to fix it, I said. You just have to mean it. She nodded. I do. And I believed her. I didn't go home with her. I didn't agree to Sunday dinners or promises of a new beginning. Some wounds take time. But when I left the cafe that day, I didn't feel like a ghost anymore. I felt like someone real. Someone seen. She hugged me outside, arms tight, face pressed against my shoulder, just like she used to. And as I walked away, I realized something I hadn't felt in months. I wasn't carrying the weight alone anymore. She picked up her piece of it. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough.